So welcome to our episode of Coaching Outdoors, and our guest today is a little bit different. So we have had a whole 4 series worth of speaking to coaches, and we are coaches ourselves, and clearly there's a bit of a gap. There is someone else in the conversation, the coachee, and ultimately our community, you spoke, we listened, and we have got our first coachee on board today. And we are really intrigued as to see where this kind of conversation goes, because clearly it's the other side. And I know that Alex will be looking forward to this particularly as well from a research perspective. And that will trigger her to go off and do some more research as to really kind of getting inside the kind of the coachee's experience. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Ian and invite him to introduce himself further.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's Ian Merrill. I just no worries. Merrill makes me sound more important than I am, doesn't it? Really, Merrill. So yeah, I live in South Manchester. What can I tell you about me? I've worked in the non-profit sector for about 25 years. Most of my work has been in the areas of addictions, mental health, working in prisons, and homelessness. My current role is working at an organisation called Shannon Trust. Shannon Trust works across the majority of prisons in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and our focus is on helping people to learn to read and do basic maths. We use a peer-led model, so we're training people in prison who can read and do maths to work with those who can't. I'm also very recently a trustee of something called the Movements Trust, which is a pretty new charity. And as the name suggests, its role is to support social and environmental movements, give them financial support, capacity support, and help them grow. So that's something I've just got involved in. I'm a dad to 3 grown-up kids. And I guess in terms of today's conversation, I'm very much an advocate of coaching, both for myself, but also for colleagues. So hopefully I'll have something helpful to say.
Definitely. And as Anna Marie said, it's really great to actually talk to a coachee, sorry, the other side of the equation and the conversation. And when we talk to our coaches that we've spoken to, we always ask them the same question at the start, and we'd love to ask you the initial question as well. And it's really about what your earliest memory is of being outdoors and why you personally like or love being outdoors so much.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, well, I'm certainly of a generation that spent more time outdoors as a child. I think, we all know that's changed a little bit these days. So I was out a lot when I was a kid. But I've got some quite specific memories of being outdoors, which have definitely stayed with me and shaped me. For example, I could only have been 7 or 8, but I had a friend nearby who seemed to have what was a massive wild garden. It's probably, if I went back now, it'd probably be quite small, but at the time it seemed enormous. And I can really remember going round to play with him, and we spent all the time outside, and it would be a big adventure, probably playing something like soldiers or hide and seek, but it just that sense of freedom and being outside and rolling around and getting away from the adults, all that good stuff. That's something I really remember well. And then probably as I got a little bit older and got a bit more license, bikes became our transport. So I can remember, particularly in school holidays, there'd be a little gang of us, I guess 7 or 8 mates from the same roads, and we would set off on bikes, and inevitably we'd end up in, we're quite lucky where I live or where I grew up. It's really on the edge of the Greater Manchester and conurbation and the Cheshire countryside. So you only had to ride for 20 minutes and you were in some really beautiful places. So used to love doing that, getting out on the bikes. And again, just sort of the freedom of being outside and probably getting into a few scrapes and yeah, just the wind in your hair and hopefully a bit of sunshine and yeah, but all weathers really. So really, really good early memories of being outside.
And it's always interesting to pose that question and see kind of what comes through, and it's always that kind of real kind of positive energy that we kind of carry with us however many years later, and what has that kind of, how has that supported our kind of decision making process as we move through life. And taking a step into kind of the coaching world, and clearly at some point you decided to work to partner with a coach, and we're going to dive into the outdoor bit later. Though, what was it that encouraged you to work with a coach, and then how have you kind of moved through that? You know, it's great to hear that you're an advocate for coaching for yourself and for others.
So I think perhaps, like for many people, somebody else I think probably spotted in me that coaching would be beneficial, and probably twisted my arm a little bit, because like most people, you're probably also resistant to it at first. But I can remember I had was a manager of mine going back a number of years, who was really, I think, quite insistent that I would benefit from coaching. It was my decision, but he was really clear about it. So I asked, what's so important about coaching? And it was just a simple phrase he came up with, which has stuck with me. He said, well, at its most basic, it's really about getting to know yourself better, which sounds quite straightforward, doesn't it? But perhaps there's layers to that. So I got introduced to a coach. It was actually quite a meaty coaching program that I signed up to, and found it pretty transformational, really. So they were quite intensive coaching sessions, and they lasted for over a year. So that there's a lot of depth to them as well. But I think it did what my old manager suggested it would. It really helped me. What's the phrase? Get under the bonnet of myself. Really understand myself better. And I think I could. And I realised the benefits of doing that with somebody who knew what they were doing. I mean, I guess we all have friends and have cups of tea and talk about stuff all the time, but doing it with a coach who's got some training and understands how it works, can take you on a bit of a journey. They can look after you through that. So I think working with a coach, it was even better than my previous managers suggested it would be, and it opened up lots of possibilities for me. And I think quite a lot of change came from that original coaching. I've done subsequent coaching as well, and as I alluded to, I've probably lost count now of the number of colleagues that I've suggested and enabled coaching to happen for them as well.
I love that, the way your manager described it to you and sort of persuaded you. It's a great way of kind of a basic way of encapsulating it, learning, getting to know yourself better. And it's all about possibilities, isn't it? And it's about helping people to sort of unwrap a little bit and delve in deeper and just find out what is possible, and working out different ways of doing things, different experiences, different perspectives. And trying out different ways of working. And as you said, it's great to sit and have chats with friends and with colleagues, but there's something about a coach that, as you said, with the training that we have, it's all about question asking and giving somebody, as you said, that safe space, which I love the way you described that that place where they can really get under the bonnet. Lots of images.
It also, I think it sort of catalyzed a skill which I've got a lot better at as well, which is this kind of ability to, particularly at difficult moments, to almost stand by yourself and observe yourself. I mean, you'll know this well, but in stressful situations, you're you can be overwhelmed by your feelings. But I think that ability to stand by yourself, observe how you're feeling in a particular scenario, realize it will pass. It doesn't define you. You can learn to manage those feelings. That's a really useful skill. And I think that really developed through the coaching conversations that I had as well.
Mm-hmm. Really get a sense that you've had some great experiences, and you've obviously had, it sounds like you've had quite a bit of coaching of different types over the years, and being an advocate as well, and bringing people on that you've worked with, and suggesting coaching to them, and getting other people into this, hopefully this advocation of coaching as well, which is wonderful. Moving now to thinking about the outdoor coaching aspect, because obviously you're here because you are an outdoor coachee.
Yeah.
And you've spent time having coaching conversations outdoors, which is really what we want to really kind of get under the skin of and find out about your experiences. So first of all, it would be wonderful to take us through, how did you find outdoor coaching? What made you decide to take your coaching conversations outdoors versus indoors, which I'm guessing is your previous experience? And what is it that you enjoy about being coached outdoors?
Sure. So, I could try and tell you it was a very deliberate strategy, and I'd researched it for many years, but that wouldn't be true. It was pure chance, really. So I was looking to do some more coaching, both for myself, but also as part of a leadership team that was developing. So I was looking for a team coach, and did do some research, and noticed a particular coach who I thought would be a great fit, who happened to be an outdoor coach. So, and I'd not done any outdoor coaching at that point, but I'm quite interested in trying new things, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And it was sort of revelatory. It's just a different level of coaching. I think for me, what it does is combines the joy of being outside, and when by outdoors, I'm assuming, for most people, that means in nature rather than in Sainsbury's car park. Other supermarkets are available. So you're in nature, so that's appealing in itself. Then, combined with the coaching stuff that we've already talked about, it's almost like, coaching, supercharged coaching. And what I like about it is, and I think this speaks to the skill of the particular coach that I started working with. And he's been on your podcast, Paul Jefferies. I should give him a mention. Who's a great coach. Paul's very good at using the nature around you as a sort of as metaphor. So he's good at spotting stuff that's happening around, and he'll try and bring that into the conversation. Also, the fact that you're usually walking, that in itself, I think, is really important. For me, it just helps me think out loud. There's something about walk, and of course, other people have done this for thousands of years, but there's something about walking in nature which is quite liberating, and it allows you to talk, and sometimes about some difficult stuff. If most people go to coaching because they're trying to make decisions or change things, so sometimes it can be difficult stuff. So I think it really helps with the process. It's good to be in nature with somebody who knows what they're doing from a coaching perspective. And in Paul's case, I don't know whether this is the methodology that all outdoor coaches use, but he's very good at picking out stuff as metaphor, as I say, or just to stimulate conversations. So it's a powerful combination, I would say.
And thank you for that. And Paul is indeed a phenomenal coach. We're both lucky to have made connection with him through Henley Business School, which we both have an association.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And every coach, as I'm sure you've discovered from your kind of coaching journey, has their own style, approach, skills, nuances that they kind of bring into the conversation. And particularly, the range of coaches that we've had in our podcast, it's really illustrative of that. That said metaphor is a part of it. that you can kind of bring in, and this is kind of getting into the weeds of things. And we're always keen to give our listeners and watchers a bit of a like fly on the wall experience. So it would just be really explorative to kind of dive into like a specific session where nature in particular had a key impact within that session, and what happened, how did you feel, what there was as a result. Tell us a story, paint us a picture. It would be great to discover more.
I can remember one of the sessions that Paul and I had. We were walking in a place called Macclesfield Forest, which is a very pretty place, but it's undulating. So we're up and down little hills, and I think there was a realization amongst both of us that as we'd been having our conversation on this kind of undulating pathway, there seemed to be a sort of ebb and flow to my conversation. So, as we picked up a bit of pace, I seemed to be, my ideas or my thoughts were quickened. And then sometimes as we slowed down, there was a bit more reflection in the conversation. So I'm not sure whether the path we were on, I'm not sure what the relationship was between the insights that came from the coaching and the little journey we did. But there seemed to be some kind of relationship. Maybe that is something that needs to be researched. I'm not sure I've got that much insightful to tell you about that, but it seemed to have an effect. And I'm not sure that conversation would have happened in the same way if we'd been sat in chairs. It was just something about it that allowed it to flow. So that's one of the things I can think about. I remember rather.
And in that moment, whilst you were having that sort of realization that the ebbs and flows of the terrain was helping the conversation, how did that impact your conversation with Paul and your actual the outcome of that coaching conversation?
Yeah, I think again it's quite hard to understand the sort of causality, but I think what it helped me do was, as well as the thoughts flowing, I was talking about a particular change that I was thinking, that I was approaching, and probably was a bit fearful of that change on some level. But I think talking it out in the way that I've described, saying it out loud, but possibly in nature as well, just reduce the size of it. It wasn't as foreboding. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? It led to change. So it was something that had been on my mind for some time, but I wasn't resolving it and I wasn't actioning it, but I have subsequently. So it was the particular issue was so working at Shannon Trust, which is a job I really enjoy and want to continue with. I also wanted to find some time to do something else, which is a bit more focused on the environment, which may not sound like much of a dilemma, but I suppose if you're pretty busy to start with and you want to do something, semi-significant, it's not going to be a 5-minute thing. You do have to think about how you're going to spend your time and make sure you've got enough energy for everything. So to cut a long story short, it allowed me to understand, I think, for myself that I could do something. I got some clarity about what that might be, and actually one of the outcomes was joining the movement's trust as a trustee, so I can make a contribution there. So it just allowed me to get over that bit of fear about, well, what if, and actually take some action, because it was the lack of action that was really starting to annoy me. I don't really like prevaricating, so I wanted to take action, but it was the concern that was holding me back. But the conversation in the coaching context really helped with that.
One of the really insightful things that you mentioned there, among all of that, was the fact that you said that being outdoors and being in that environment made the challenge seem a bit smaller and more, able to deal with. And it's one of the really fascinating things. The more people we've talked to from a sort of an ad hoc conversation point of view with coaches, a lot of them do, they talk about that. They talk about the fact that you're out in the big open world, and it means that you can see your challenge or your problem as something that's actually achievable, because the size of the world around you and the expanse of nature around you helps you to really sort of see perspective and gain perspective. And it's something that came up in the research I did, actually, and it's one of those really fascinating elements of being outdoors in nature. And it's not just around coaching, it's around people being in nature in general. That's why people have often gone off on walks. You talk about ancient wisdom, and the Maoris or the Aborigines would go off on walks to gain that perspective that they might not necessarily have had, and just be with nature. So there's some really wonderful examples there. Thank you, and really appreciate you sharing those with us. One of the other aspects which we do talk about, being outdoors isn't always wonderful. It isn't always rosy. Things can happen. Things do come up. We've had guests on who've talked about, coming across a man who'd fallen over on a coastal walk and broken his leg and having to deal with that in the moment. We've had people talking about the same coach, actually, coming across an injured guillemot and having to tuck the injured guillemot underneath her arm and carry her off back to safety, while still having a coaching conversation. There's obviously there are some times of being outdoors where things do happen and challenges do come up. Has there been a time when you've been outdoors that things haven't gone to plan, or where you found things particularly challenging or difficult, or maybe even when you haven't enjoyed it so much? Are there any examples you can give, and how did you deal with those sort of experiences?
I can think of something which is very minor, really, but actually I wonder whether it is something that other people may slightly worry about, and that's just being fit enough to do coaching outside. I mean, don't get me wrong, you don't need to be a triathlete to take part in a coaching session outdoors, but so to cut a long story short, I've got a bit of a dodgy knee. So, and I used to do a lot of walking, which I've scaled back a little bit. So I think this is an example of a limiting belief. So I can remember when I started the outdoor coaching with Paul, I probably a throwaway comment, something like, fine, but I've got a dodgy knee, let's not go too far. But once you start getting into the coaching conversation, you forget that. And it occurred to me a bit later that it was completely a limiting belief. So I've stopped saying that now. I've got a slightly weak knee, but I cycle most days, I walk lots of places, so it was just a limiting belief. So no big deal. But I think for other people who may be considering outdoor coaching, there's probably just practical stuff like make sure you're togged up and you are able to walk a few miles and that sort of stuff. Really, that's really the only thing I could say. But it was good because it became a realization that it was just a limiting belief.
Thank you for highlighting that, and the practicalities, whether it's physical ability or the weather or what to wear, accessibility. I mean, these are things that do kind of crop up and do need due consideration ultimately, because they don't want to become an interference within the coaching conversation. If your knee was properly giving you niggles as you were kind of scaling some mountain, your head wouldn't exactly be in the place to be able to do constructive work. I
was just going to, one other thing, which is, again, very detailed, but you want to remove the barriers, don't you, when it comes to engaging. So I would say that if you're going to do outdoor coaching, the coaching session might be an hour or maybe a little longer, depending on the arrangement. Typically, because you want to meet in nice outdoor places, you may have to travel a little bit. So by the time you've travelled, done your coaching and travelled back, it's a commitment of a few hours. Now, to my mind, it's just an investment in yourself. That's good. But if you've not planned for that, it could become a little bit of a barrier. So I would just to be aware of that, really, as someone who's perhaps thinking of outdoor coaching.
Mm. And within that travel time, what does that give you in the kind of transition into and out of coaching? How does that add to the experience?
Yeah, so I think it's if you're intentional about it, you can use the travel to as preparation. You're just thinking about, what may come up, and then afterwards you're doing a bit of processing. I think I may have said I sort of these days I tend to definitely use public transport most of the time, and I cycle and walk. So, it's half a day when I've done it, but that's fine because you use that time in the way that I've suggested. It becomes even more of an investment in your future, because you're very intentional about using the time to prepare, to do, and to process the coaching experience. So I'm not saying for me, it wasn't a barrier. I'm just suggesting people ought to be aware of that, because it isn't an hour, unless you're very lucky and you live next door to your coach and you live in a beautiful place. It's likely to be 2 or 3 hours, but as long as people know that, they can plan for it.
And thank you. And the time piece, often I haven't even got enough time to work with a coach online. And then yes, there is this additional, the location is huge. How are people getting there? Is it public transport? Is it private car? Is it by foot or by two wheels? So there definitely is, all of that does need to be factored in, though the way that you structured it and the way that you approach it, this really is time for you. This is a huge investment, and it's enabling you to go deep. And that is something, within all your, in a way, a skill as a coachee, you've learned to do that over time.
Yeah, I think there's probably something else going on as well. I mean, we're all human, aren't we? And if, coaching can be, it can be challenging in terms of, we're often talking about the need to change or to do something differently. So I suppose what I'm saying, we're all capable of telling ourselves a story. I can't go to coaching today because I'm too busy. There might be something underneath that. I'm a bit of afraid of going to coaching today, so I'll find a reason not to go. So I think planning for that is helpful. It's just, it's one less excuse, isn't it, to not engage. I mean, I wouldn't want to give everyone the impression it's terrible. It's just, it's personal change, and we probably wouldn't be talking to coaches if we'd mastered that. So yeah, just something else to be aware of.
No, and it is. It's important to be upfront about it. It's actually, coaching. It's hard. It can be like mentally and emotionally, you're like doing the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And I remember coming out of a session with one of my coaches, and I just felt completely washed out.
Right.
Oh my goodness, just absolutely drained, and almost had triggered a slight like kind of vision, like fuzzy, migrainey. I just needed to go, and because it had gone so deep, these beliefs were so deep rooted that it's in your DNA, some of this stuff. And moving through that can be really, really hard. And it's a conversation that I definitely have with my clients, and I know that other coaches do, is around challenge. Like what is your relationship with challenge? And for some people on a certain day, like, yes, I'm up for it, let's go, let's dig deep. And other days it's like, I'm feeling a little bit fragile, let's get the gloves on and be gentle, and what I need is some support.
Or I'll tell myself I'm too busy to go. So just one to watch for, I think.
So bringing it back to kind of indoor coaching, outdoor coaching, that's a huge kind of stereotypical division going on, and clearly you can be indoors in a room full of plants and you're kind of out in nature. But just from like the basics of it, like what would you say like the benefits, the advantages are for you in a nutshell?
Yeah, I mean, I think first thing I'd say is I'd much rather somebody engage with coaching per se than not engage with coaching. So whether it's indoor or outdoor, clearly coaching I'm an advocate of, and I think it's very valuable. But there's something else about outdoor coaching, which I think I touched upon a little bit. You know, being in nature is definitely, you used the word perspective before. I found that very much. It just lends a bit of perspective. You know, maybe your problems aren't so earth-shattering. They're important to you, but you know, there's a bigger world out there. There's something bigger than you, and nature really underlines that, I think. So that's really good. I mean, for me, being in nature and moving go together. I mean, it's nice to sit on the bench and dwell for a little while, but I think from a coaching perspective, the fact that you're moving in nature that's where the real value comes from. Yeah, so I think once you recognise, or you're willing to recognise that coaching could help you, being in nature, lending that perspective, moving, which gives you kind of energy and something additional to really get stuck into the conversation. I think those are the things that I would say I've found really beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and who doesn't like being outside in a nice place as well? You know, it's you know, what's not to like, really.
Mm-hmm. And I think as well, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it, where, you know, coaching is beneficial, and we know it is, and there's lots of research out there that proves it is, but also we know it is. We wouldn't be doing what we do as coaches if we didn't know that, and coachees wouldn't be coming to coaching and not just coming to it in the first place, but then realizing just how powerful it is, and carrying on, and you know, for years and years, and like yourself, advocating it for others. And so yeah, you know, we never want to say that, you know, outdoor coaching and indoor coaching, there should be a divide between the two, but there is definitely, as you said, aspects to outdoor coaching that are different to indoor coaching. And yes, you could get up and walk around a room indoors just to get some movement into it. And I know coaches that do that with their coaches. They get them up, they move around the room, they talk to different furniture and look at the window. There are ways of doing it, but I think, you know, as you said, being outdoors, you've got that nature around you, and you're walking a path, aren't you, rather than just walking around in a circle, that sort of thing. And you've already sort of made some suggestions and obviously given a lot of insight into your experiences. But if we had, you know, people listening to this podcast or watching this podcast who are on the fence and trying to decide, do I go outdoors? What would you say to them? What kind of encouragement would you give to somebody who might be thinking about starting their coaching world outside?
Yeah, I mean, it's not very sophisticated, this, but I would just say, just do it. You know, give it a try. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, maybe we shouldn't go there, but I would say that I would just encourage people to try it. I mean, I think my sense is that if you've picked the right coach, and you tried an outdoor coaching session, and for some reason, which I think is unlikely, it wasn't for you, your coach would adapt with you. They'd either say, okay, well, that's fine, let's do the next one indoors. Or they'd say, okay, well, maybe this, you know, our chemistry's not quite right, and we'll, you know, look for a different coach. So I think the right kind of coaches, which I'm sure you work with, will be flexible, and it will, you know, work around that, and they'll see that somebody might be nervous about it and work with that. So I'd say give it a go. You know, you're not signing up to something for life. I don't think I've got anything more sophisticated than give it a go, really. There's nothing. I don't think there's anything to be afraid of. I'm sure there may be individuals who have particular challenges about walking in nature, for example. So there's an accessibility thing there, isn't there? But that'd be quite particular to an individual. I think if you feel like you could, give it a try.
Thank you for that. And as a coach, it's that coachee centered, person centered, and it always reminds me. I was working with a client in London, and we had our first session outdoors, and been through the whole kind of onboarding and outside, and I ended up walking around some beautiful parks. And for them, it was too much sensory overload,
really? Right.
which was clearly we took that into consideration. And the next second session, okay, where do you want to meet? And they chose this different venue. It's kind of this cafe that they love to go to. And for what I found interesting as a coach was in the cafe, I was then sensory overloaded because there was people going around, and the way that the sound was buffering. I found it really, really distracting.
Too much. Yeah.
So it's just that kind of realization. We all process things. We have different sensory levels, and how we process them is highly, highly personal. And again, it can change as well, which makes us all complex beings. So the just do it, sometimes just to the point, just get on with it, take action.
And you're doing it with somebody else, of course, so it's that helps. Doing things on your own can be a big barrier, can't it?
And it sounds from your story that you found Paul by kind of potluck almost. You were actually looking for a team coach, and then he was outdoor.
Not quite potluck, because Paul was I think looking to build some different coaching clients in the not-for-profit sector, and he'd put his information on a membership organisation that I'm a member of, and so I became aware of him through that. But I think in reading up about him, and I think I saw some stuff that he put online, I was interested to find out more. And and then the outdoor coaching element of that really came into, it became real when we did it. So it's a fantastic thing to be able to do, and I'm very privileged to have got the chance. So I would encourage others to take that opportunity if they've got it.
And that's a really important lesson for coaches as well, to within our reaching out. And yes, there may be the outdoor coaching in there, and that's what we love doing. And actually, how can we leverage into other networks and use our other skills to get ultimately to support our business development and to get interest? Because it very much sounds like Paul is leveraged in, okay, I want to work in non-for-profits. Okay, where are they?
Yes.
Okay, I love working with teams, and I love working outdoors. So from a marketing spread perspective, that is what helps. And it's also about posting as well, because sometimes Alex knows you, sometimes you kind of post and you're like, am I getting any traction with this? Is anyone actually seeing this?
Sure.
And then actually once you get like a hook, someone then does go back and read, like, what are you sharing? What are you saying? What are you getting involved in?
Yeah, I think that's really important. So Paul, I don't know Paul extremely well, but fairly well through our conversations. I mean, he's very intentional in his kind of coaching business strategy. He knows what he wants to do, and he's got a plan in place to pursue that. And then yes, you do have to use stuff like social media to so that more people can see. I mean, I think you've got to be deliberate about that as well. So those two things, be clear about what you're doing, and then to market that. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So any other kind of, resources or research that you would recommend to a coach who is looking to attract coaches?
I think I'd probably, and I've not actually talked to Paul about this explicitly, but I would imagine that he'd research the sector. So obviously the not-for-profit sector is it's not homogenous. There's many types of organisation, but I would have thought that he'd, because his background is business, I would imagine that he'd research the not-for-profit sector to some extent to get a feel for it. The people worked in it. So I think any coach looking at a different sector ought to do something like that. I think maybe treat it as a bit of a pilot. You know, if you're going to work with people from different sectors, maybe be clear about that and say, you know, ask for opportunities to learn about that sector, you know, as you're building up your understanding of it. So yeah, a bit of a test and learn approach probably makes sense as well, rather than putting your mortgage on it.
That's what's something really important for us as coaches to learn as well and understand, is that, you know, our clients can come from all walks of life, from all different sectors, all different backgrounds, and you know, we might focus our business model in one particular area, or it might be a case of, you know, let's get into new sectors, into new industries. I always find it funny whenever you fill out any kind of online form and it asks you what you do for a living. Coaching is never on there for starters, and even if it is, it asks you what industry do you work in, and there's never an all or it depends on what day of the week it is. Because it is truly a job that works across all sectors and all industries, and that's one of the things I personally love, and I know a lot of coaches absolutely love about it. It's just the you know, every client is so different and wonderfully different, and that's what makes it so exciting for us as well.
Yeah, well, I must. But if there is something in the idea that you know, coaching is really about people getting to know themselves better, then, you know, there are 8 billion of us. There's plenty of people. What they do for a living is almost immaterial in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, Ian, we're going to wrap this up for today, and you know, you've been a wonderful guest, and you really have given us that insight that we were looking for into the coachee side of the equation, and really getting under, as you said, under the bonnet for us as well, about, you know, what it is that brought you to outdoor coaching and what it is you really enjoy about it, with a really healthy dose in there of, you know, some ideas and suggestions of ways in which either people who are being coached already or potential coachees, you know, things for them to learn from your experience, which is always, you know, this is what our podcast is really about. We just love sharing experiences that other people can learn from, take on board, and it's one of the pieces of feedback we get a lot, actually, is that, you know, people are learning from others, and that's really what this is all about. And hopefully our coach listeners as well are learning from your experiences. So maybe some of our coaches don't necessarily, for instance, bring nature into the conversation in the way that you've suggested, you know, you said Paul does. So maybe they'll go out and try that, you know, make it more explicit rather than being maybe a little bit, you know, less explicit in their coaching style. So there's lots of ways both our coach listeners and our coachee listeners will learn from this. So thank you so much for your time today, Ian.
Pleasure.
We really appreciate having you, and thank you for joining our little podcast. We really appreciate it.
No, at all. Really enjoyed it, and thanks for the chance to take part. Great to meet you both, and thanks for your questions. So and keep up the good work. It's a good thing that you do.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast. Thanks so much in advance for your support.